She had learned to love the silence of rejection more than the noise of belonging. The cabin stood alone on the ridge where the pine forest ended and the world fell away, a place so remote that even the pack's memory of her had frozen solid years ago. Kira had built this sanctuary with her own hands after the rejection, after they cast her out for refusing to bear an heir she didn't choose, after the Alpha King himself had declared her barren of purpose. The word useless still echoed in her bones like a curse carved into marrow. Outside, the November wind clawed at the wooden walls. Snow had begun its relentless descent 3 days ago, and the mountains were swallowing themselves in white. Kira stood at the window, her silver eyes, the mark of her wolf bloodline, reflecting the dying light. Those eyes had been beautiful once. Now they were just proof of what she'd lost. She was stirring the fire when she heard it, a sound between a whimper and a howl, fractured and desperate. Kira froze. The wolves avoided this place. The scent markers she'd laid down in her first months of exile still held, a warning written in herbs and bitter magic. Stay away. This is a place of the rejected, and rejection is contagious. The sound came again, closer. Not a warning, a plea. Against every instinct honed by 5 years of solitude, Kira opened the door. The wind hit her like a living thing, carrying snow that bit at her skin. She stepped into the storm, her bare feet already numb against the frozen ground. The forest was dark, but her wolf's eyes cut through it. And there, at the edge of the tree line, she saw him. A pup. Barely more than a yearling in human form, naked and bleeding, his skin already taking on the blue-white pallor of hypothermia. His ribs showed through his chest like a xylophone of bone. His left shoulder bore claw marks so deep they had stopped bleeding hours ago, a death sentence in this cold. Kira's breath caught. This was a trap. It had to be. The pack didn't send dying children to lonely cabins unless they wanted something, unless they wanted her. But the pup's eyes, pale gold, almost amber, locked onto hers with a clarity that made her stomach drop. Not feral, not mindless. Aware, terrified, human in a way that transcended fur and instinct. "Please," he whispered, and the single word carried an accent she recognized. Northern. Royal. Kira didn't think. She moved. She carried him inside, his body a dead weight of fever and shock, his blood soaking into her clothes. She laid him on the hearth where the fire was strongest, wrapped him in every blanket she owned, and began the work of saving what the mountains had tried to claim. His fever spiked that night. He thrashed and spoke in languages she didn't know, his wolf form flickering beneath his skin like a candle about to extinguish. Kira stayed awake, cooling his forehead with snow water, whispering words that had no meaning, not to him, but to the universe. She had learned long ago that sometimes survival was a prayer, and prayers were just words spoken into the dark, hoping something answered. By dawn, his fever had broken. By the second day, his eyes focused. By the third, he tried to sit up. "Don't," Kira said, pressing her palm against his chest. She felt his heartbeat, steady now, strong. The claw marks were healing with an accelerated speed that made her pause. His wolf was powerful, bloodline strong. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, fractured by days of fever. "Somewhere safe." Kira didn't add. Somewhere the world forgot exists. He studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What's your name?" "Kira." He stopped. Some internal calculation seemed to happen behind his eyes. "Ash. My name is Ash." It was a lie. Not because she couldn't smell the truth. She could, woven into his scent like gold thread through dark wool. It was a lie because whatever his real name was, he'd decided it was safer locked away. Kira understood that language fluently. She spoke it every day. "All right, Ash. she said quietly. Rest. Your body is still healing. He didn't ask how he'd gotten here. He didn't ask who'd brought him to her door like a final gift from a cruel god. He just nodded, his golden eyes closing, and within moments, sleep claimed him again. That night, as Kira sat by the fire, she allowed herself one dangerous thought. Maybe I didn't save him. Maybe he saved me. For the first time in 5 years, the silence of her exile felt less like punishment and more like preparation. Like the mountains had been teaching her mercy in isolation, waiting for the moment when mercy would matter more than pride. Outside, the snow continued its patient work, burying the world. Inside, the fire kept 2 broken things alive, and neither of them yet understood that the universe had made a bargain with the other. The pup at her hearth was no ordinary wolf. And rejection, Kira would learn, was sometimes just destiny in disguise. Ash woke to the smell of bread and something burning, in the best way, the way that meant survival and comfort instead of pain. 3 weeks had passed. His shoulder had healed into new scar tissue, pale and raised like a brand from another life. He was strong enough now to sit at the table, to feed himself, to watch the woman who'd saved him move through the cabin with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to need nobody. Kira was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with symmetry or softness. Her silver eyes held the weight of 1,000 rejections, and her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd spent years proving she could survive alone. She wore her exile like armor. "You're staring again," she said, without looking up from the bread she was slicing. "I'm trying to understand," Ash replied, his voice still rough but growing stronger. "Why you didn't turn me over to the nearest patrol, why you didn't demand answers." Kira set the bread on the table between them. "Because I know what it feels like to be abandoned in the snow with nothing but silence for company." The weight of that statement settled between them like snow on old graves. Ash wanted to ask her story, but her closed expression told him it wasn't his to claim yet. "The wolves who left me," he said carefully, "were rogue, not pack. I'd been tracking them for—" He stopped. The lie he'd offered before felt small now, insufficient. "I'm not who I said I am. I know." Kira sat across from him, her silver eyes meeting his with absolute clarity. "You have royal blood. I can smell it. The kind that carries duty like a second heart." Ash's throat tightened. "If you know that, why haven't you acted on it? The bounty alone." "I'm not interested in bounties." Kira broke off a piece of bread, the motion deliberate, measured. "I'm interested in why a prince was out in the mountains alone, wounded and running from his own kind." He should have lied. He should have maintained the fiction, kept distance, prepared for the moment when she inevitably betrayed him. But there was something in Kira's eyes, a familiarity born not of knowing him, but of knowing loss. "My father is the Alpha King," Ash said quietly, "which makes me heir to a crown I never wanted. Last month, I discovered the royal advisors were planning to execute a rebellion leader, a woman. They wanted to make an example of her." He paused. "I warned her, helped her escape. And they sent you into the mountains to die for it. Not officially. My father doesn't know. But certain members of the court decided my usefulness had expired." Ash looked down at his healed shoulder. "They arranged for rogues to find me on the northern road. They almost succeeded." Kira rose and moved to the window, her silhouette framed by the winter landscape beyond. "You chose mercy over obedience. I chose conscience over crown." She turned back to him, and something shifted in her expression, a recognition, as if she'd been waiting for him to speak exactly those words. "The woman you helped," Kira asked, "was she important to you?" "No," Ash met her gaze. "But her sister was. She was going to be executed for the same crime, believing that power shouldn't require cruelty. I couldn't save her. I could only save the sister, and I had to disappear to do it. My father can't know I'm alive. Not yet. Not until I'm strong enough to—" He didn't finish. The thought was dangerous, even in this safe place. To challenge him. It wasn't a question. Kira understood rebellion the way most people understand breathing, as a necessity, not a choice. "Yes," Ash whispered. Kira returned to the table and sat across from him again. "Eat," she commanded. "You're going to need your strength." "For what?" "For learning that a prince and an exile share more than blood spilled in snow." She broke off more bread, and this time she smiled. A small, wounded thing that made Ash's wolf instinct stir. "My name isn't just Kira. It's Kira of House Solstice. I was rejected because I refused to become what the court wanted me to be, a vessel, a prize, a bargaining chip in their games of power." Her silver eyes blazed. 13 years of silence, and I've learned that rejection is a form of freedom they never intended to give. Ash felt the weight of her revelation settle into him like destiny. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Kira said, "I think the universe doesn't send broken things to each other by accident. I think it sends them as mirrors. And maybe, if we look long enough at each other's wounds, we'll see something the world tried to destroy in both of us." Outside, the wind began to howl, a sound that seemed to echo from the mountains themselves, as if the earth itself was bearing witness to a covenant being formed between two souls the kingdom had tried to erase. Ash's wolf stirred. For the first time since his escape, it didn't feel like panic. It felt like homecoming. The storm lasted 4 days. It came from the north with the fury of something ancient and purposeful, wind that screamed through the cabin like a living thing. Ash and Kira were forced into close quarters, the kind of proximity that dissolves walls faster than time ever could. On the second night, as the fire burned low and the temperature dropped to levels that made even their wolf blood strain against the cold, Ash asked the question that had been building in him like pressure beneath skin. "Why didn't you die out here? How did you survive 5 years alone?" Kira was sitting cross-legged before the hearth, her silver eyes reflecting firelight like twin moons. She'd been teaching him the meditation techniques she'd developed in exile, ways to slow the pulse, to make the body consume less heat, to make loneliness feel like choice instead of punishment. "I have a gift," she said quietly. "It took me 3 years to understand it. The pack called it useless because it doesn't manifest in power or strength." She held out her hand toward the fire, and the flames responded, not dramatically, but noticeably. They curled toward her fingers like living things, bringing warmth without consuming. "I can hear what fire wants to say. I can ask it to be gentle, and it listens." Ash watched, transfixed. "That's not useless. It is if you can't dominate it, if you can't weaponize it, if you use it to heal instead of harm." Kira withdrew her hand, and the flames settled back to their normal hunger. The court rejected the gift because they saw it as a betrayal of wolf nature. In a world that worships power, mercy is a liability. "Show me," Ash said. "I want to understand it." What followed was hours of learning, Kira teaching him to listen to the fire not as a predator listens, but as a conversation partner. It wasn't about control. It was about communication. It was about recognizing that even flame had a nature, a preference, a kind of consciousness that responded to gentleness rather than force. By the time dawn broke, Ash's hands were raw from learning, but his eyes held something new, understanding that there were forms of strength the kingdom had never taught him to value. "In the Royal Academy," he told her as they sat watching the new day push back the night, "we're trained to see gifts like yours as weaknesses, vulnerabilities to exploit. My father has a general whose gift is dominion over stone. He can make mountains move. Another advisor can see the future, but only in moments of violence. Their gifts are celebrated because they feed the machine of power. And yours? Kira asked. Ash hesitated. He hadn't spoken of this to anyone, not even in the safety of this exile. I can feel the truth in any creature's heart, he said. I can sense if they're lying, if they're afraid, if they're capable of cruelty or compassion. When I was born, it was celebrated, seen as a royal gift, a tool for identifying threats and traitors. He turned to face her. But the older I got, the more I realized it was a curse, because I could feel every person the kingdom was torturing. Every child separated from parents, every death ordered by my father. I could feel all of it in their hearts, and I couldn't turn it off. Kira reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. That's not a curse, she whispered. That's a conscience. It's both, Ash said. A curse because the world wants me to ignore it. A conscience because I can't. They sat like that as the morning grew stronger. Two people the kingdom had rejected for the crime of caring too much, for the sin of being merciful in a hierarchy built on cruelty. At midday, Ash asked a question that changed everything. What if we didn't have to choose? Between power and conscience? Between duty and love? Kira's silver eyes searched his face. How? I don't know yet, Ash admitted. But my father is dying. The healers give him until spring. When he passes, I become Alpha King. And if I become Alpha King with your gifts beside me, with your understanding of gentleness... He stopped, afraid to say it aloud, afraid that speaking it into existence would make it too large, too impossible. You'd change everything, Kira finished. Yes, and they'd never forgive us for it, she said. The court, the old guard, everyone who profits from the way things are. No, Ash agreed. They won't. But maybe... He squeezed her hand. Maybe there's power in being rejected together that we could never find apart. Kira was quiet for a long time. Then she rose and moved to the window, looking out at the mountains that had sheltered them both. If you're asking me what I think you're asking, she said, then you need to know that love and revolution aren't the same thing. Sometimes they ask us to choose between them. I know, Ash said. I've known since the moment you pulled me out of the snow. Kira turned back to him, her silver eyes bright with tears and starlight. Then, yes, she whispered. Yes to everything you're building in that space between your words. Outside, the fire in the mountains seemed to burn brighter, as if the earth itself was blessing what two exiles had decided, to transform their rejection into redemption, their isolation into revolution. And now, Ash and Kira invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're reading from and the exact hour you found this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of night they find your heart. Winter had teeth, and they tasted like iron. 2 months into their alliance, the first messengers came, pack scouts carrying the royal seal. They didn't know Ash was alive. They were searching for something else. A woman who'd committed treason by association, a healer who'd hidden a rebel priestess, a sister to the woman Ash had saved. The head scout was a man named Thorn, and he carried orders to burn the cabin and execute anyone found within. Ash felt them coming before they arrived, felt the presence of armed wolves through the forest like pressure against his skin. His gifts extended beyond heart reading. He could sense intention, could taste violence like copper on his tongue. They're here, he told Kira, and there was no fear in his voice, only clarity. 5 of them. Thorn leads them. Kira didn't panic. She'd spent 5 years preparing for the possibility that the world would find her. She moved to the hearth and placed her palms against the stone that surrounded the fire. I'm going to ask the flames to protect the cabin, she said quietly. But Ash, if I do this, if I demonstrate power like that, they'll know. They'll report everything. I know, Ash replied. He stood beside her, his young face set with a determination that made him look older, more regal, more dangerous. Do it. It's time. Kira closed her eyes and began to sing, not in words, but in a language older than kingdoms, older than language itself. The fire responded like a lover recognizing its other half. The flames rose higher, hotter, but they didn't consume. Instead, they formed a barrier at the cabin's edges, a wall of heat that would burn anyone who tried to breach it but left the interior untouched. When the scouts burst from the forest, they found themselves facing something they'd never encountered, fire that obeyed a single woman's will. Thorn skidded to a halt, his eyes wide with recognition. "House Solstice," he breathed. "The rejected one." "The same," Kira replied, her voice steady as stone. "I suggest you leave." "Our orders are explicit," Thorn said, but she could smell his fear, the uncertainty of a man who'd been trained to face violence, not magic. "We're to execute anyone harboring." Ash stepped forward, and the moment he moved into the firelight, Thorn's breath stopped. Recognition flooded the scout's face like dawn. He saw the royal bloodline in Ash's bone structure, the ancient power in his bearing, the unmistakable mark of the Alpha King's line. "Your Highness," Thorn whispered, and dropped to one knee. The other scouts followed, confusion and horror warring in their expressions. "I'm alive," Ash said simply, "and I'm where I choose to be. Return to my father and tell him that his son has learned what the kingdom never taught, that the greatest power lies not in dominion, but in mercy, that I've found something here worth more than the throne." "Sir," Thorn said, his voice rough, "if the court learns you've been sheltered by a rejected wolf, if they learn you've aligned with, then they'll know I'm no longer their puppet." Ash cut him off. "Tell my father I'm coming home, but I'm coming as myself, not as the thing they tried to make me. And the woman beside me will stand as an equal in whatever kingdom I build." He paused. "And if they want to stop me, they'll have to kill me first." Thorn rose slowly, processing. The older scout's eyes moved between Ash and Kira, seeing something in them that transcended politics, seeing the fierce, impossible love that rejection had forged. "Your Highness," Thorn said finally, "there are those of us in the kingdom who've been waiting for someone to say what you just said. We will prepare the way, but you must move soon. Your father weakens by the day." After they left, Ash and Kira stood together as the fire slowly lowered, trusting them again. Kira's hands were shaking. "We've crossed a line," she whispered. "There's no going back now." "I know," Ash said, and he took her hands in his. "I've known since the moment I woke to find you'd saved my life, since I felt your heart and knew it matched mine. Two people the world tried to break, and we chose each other instead." He kissed her then, tasting salt and starlight, tasting the mountain air that had sheltered them both. "When spring comes," he said against her lips, "we march to the capital together, and whatever happens, victory or death, revolution or ruin, we face it as one." Kira pulled back and looked into his eyes, those pale gold eyes that had called to something ancient in her from the first moment she'd found him bleeding in the snow. "Then let's make sure we win," she said. "Let's make sure every rejected soul in this kingdom knows that their rejection was never a verdict, it was a doorway. Outside, the mountains began to echo with a sound like distant thunder. Or perhaps it was just the earth, shifting its weight toward a new destiny. The kingdom's capital was built on stone so old it had turned gray as bone, and the walls held secrets written in blood and conquest. Ash hadn't walked these streets since his exile began, and every corridor seemed to pulse with his father's presence, the dying Alpha King, still radiating power through force of will alone. The court didn't know Kira was coming. They found out when the gates opened, and a woman walked beside the thought-dead prince, her silver eyes blazing with a light that had nothing to do with reflection. Chaos followed. The Alpha King's immediate advisors called it treason. The old guard called it corruption. But something deeper stirred in the younger wolves, in the soldiers who'd been forced to execute consciences, in the healers who'd been forbidden to use their gifts for anything but war. The throne room was vast and built to intimidate, all soaring ceilings and shadows designed to make supplicants feel small. But when Ash entered with Kira at his side, it was the room that seemed to shrink. The Alpha King lay on his throne, his body withered by the illness that consumed him, but his eyes still burned with the fire of absolute authority. "My son," the old king rasped, "risen from the grave he was supposed to occupy." "Father," Ash replied, his voice steady and clear, "I've come to discuss the future of this kingdom." "You've come to show your defiance," the Alpha King spat. "You've come with that woman, a rejected one. I can smell the exile on her like filth. You've come to challenge the very foundations of our power." "No," Ash said, and he stepped forward with a grace that made his father's guards tense. "I've come to offer you a choice. You can die as you've lived, fighting change, clinging to a system that requires cruelty to survive. Or you can let me rebuild this kingdom into something that doesn't need to reject its own people for being merciful." The Alpha King's laugh was a rattling thing. "You are weak, you always were. That's why I sent you to die, because I cannot afford a weak heir." Ash looked at Kira, and something passed between them. A moment of absolute clarity. She stepped forward, and the torches on the walls flared with sudden heat. Fire danced across her palms, not as a weapon, but as a demonstration. "Weakness," Kira said, and her voice carried the weight of 5 years of exile, "is doing what others demand of you. Strength is choosing your own path when the world insists you should disappear." The court erupted. Voices clashed like swords, but through it all, Ash felt it. The younger wolves responding, the healers and the sensitive gifted wolves who'd been forced into silence finally recognizing themselves in what Kira and Ash were saying. The Alpha King tried to rise, but his body betrayed him. He collapsed back onto the throne, and in that moment of weakness, Ash saw something he'd never seen before. His father's fear. Not of death, but of irrelevance. Not of losing the crown, but of his legacy being forgotten by a kingdom that moved beyond him. "You will die for this betrayal," the old king whispered. "Perhaps," Ash replied, "but not today, and not forgotten." He turned from the throne, and Kira followed. Behind them, the court fractured like winter ice, some standing with the old guard, but more, so many more, rising to follow. That night, as Ash and Kira stood on the palace balcony overlooking the capital's torches, they heard the first songs rising from the streets. Songs of hope, songs of change. "We haven't won yet," Kira warned, though she smiled as she said it. "I know," Ash replied, "but for the first time, I think we might." He took her hand, and together they watched the city awaken to the possibility that rejection could become revolution, and revolution could become redemption. The Alpha King died 3 days later, not from illness, but from the rage of watching his own authority crumble before his eyes. His heart simply stopped, as if it had finally understood that the kingdom it had ruled was no longer his to command. Ash was crowned at dawn, and the crown they placed on his head was ancient gold, the same metal that had crowned every Alpha King for 1,000 years. But when the High Priestess set it there, everyone knew something had fundamentally changed. They could feel it in the air, taste it like copper and starlight. Kira stood at his side, not behind him, not subservient. Equal. The court's old guard tried to challenge it. 3 powerful wolves, generals with gifts of stone and fire and shadow, demanded the right to contest his throne. The law allowed it. Tradition demanded it. Ash didn't fight them with violence. Instead, he felt their hearts as they approached him. And he spoke what he found there. Their fear, their grief, their desperate need for the old ways because they were the only ways they'd ever known. And then he offered them something else, a place in his court, but not as masters. as counselors, as men who could learn that power didn't require domination. 2 accepted, 1 walked away, a choice Ash allowed. The first reform was simple. Any wolf who'd been rejected for their gift could petition to return. They came slowly at first, then in waves, healers and seers, artists and philosophers, dreamers and believers in mercy. The capital filled with a kind of light it had never held before, but there was still resistance. In the outer provinces, old alpha families refused to acknowledge Ash's rule. They called for his death. They gathered armies. War was coming. But not yet. Kira felt it as summer turned to autumn, felt it in the way the earth seemed to hold its breath. She and Ash had 6 months, perhaps less, before the kingdom would fracture into civil war. One night, as they lay in the royal chambers, Ash held her close and asked the question that had been building in him like inevitability. "If I'm killed in what's coming," he said quietly, "what will you do?" Kira pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I'll burn the kingdom to the ground and rebuild it from ash." "That's not an answer," he said, but he was smiling. "Yes, it is." Kira touched his face, running her fingers along his jawline. "It means I choose you, not because you're a king, but because you're the only person who chose me when I was nothing but a broken thing left behind." Ash kissed her, tasting salt and devotion. "Marry me," he said. "Before the war comes, before anything else happens. Marry me in front of the kingdom so they know this is real. This isn't politics. This is revolution of the heart." Kira laughed, and the sound was pure joy. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. They were married at the autumn equinox, beneath the full moon that seemed to descend from the sky itself to bless their union. The ceremony was old, older than kingdoms laws. They spoke vows not to each other, but to the universe itself, promising to remain true to mercy, to chosen family, to the radical belief that rejection could transform into redemption. When the priestess declared them bonded, the fire throughout the capital blazed silver bright for a single, perfect moment. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. War came with snow that fell like ash. The provinces rose in rebellion, led by an old general named Corvus, who'd served the Alpha King for 30 years. He brought 10,000 wolves, ancient magic, and the unshakable conviction that Ash's reign was a perversion of everything the kingdom had fought to build. The battle would determine everything, whether Ash and Kira's vision could survive, or whether the old order would crush them back into exile. Ash stood on the walls of the capital and felt every soldier's heart, their fear, their determination, their desperate need to believe they were fighting for something righteous. Some of them were, others simply had no choice. Kira found him there as night fell. "I can feel them coming," she said. 20 miles away and moving fast. Corvus isn't interested in negotiation." "I know." Ash took her hand. "I've known since my father died that this was inevitable. You can't change a system without bloodshed. That's one truth the old kingdoms understood that I've been trying to deny." "Then we don't deny it," Kira replied. "We acknowledge it, we grieve it, but we don't let grief stop us from fighting." That night, the council met. Generals and healers, warriors and philosophers, old wolves and new. They debated strategy, but beneath the debate ran something else, a collective understanding that this wasn't just about military victory. It was about proving that a kingdom built on mercy could still survive. The battle came at dawn. What followed was no cinematic heroics, no moment where one brave act turned the tide. It was chaos and blood and the terrible weight of decision, wolves transforming, fire and stone clashing, and through it all, Ash and Kira moving together like 2 halves of a single soul. Kira's gift had evolved over months of study with the kingdom's oldest mages. She could do more than guide fire now. She could see intention in its dance, could predict where violence would strike next by reading the smallest tremors in heat and breath. Ash's gift deepened as well. With a gesture and a word, he could make soldiers hesitate by showing them the truth of their own hearts, the mother they were leaving behind, the child they hoped to see again, the secret prayer they whispered when no one was listening. It wasn't victory by domination. It was victory by choosing, moment by moment, to be merciful when cruelty would have been easier. By midday, Corvus stood before them in single combat. The old general was still powerful, still dangerous, but as Ash faced him, the prince felt the truth he'd always known, that Corvus was fighting against himself more than against Ash, fighting against the part of him that had always wanted to believe in mercy but had been trained to value strength. "I don't want to kill you," Ash said quietly. "Then you're a fool," Corvus spat, raising his sword. "A fool and a failure." But when he struck, his blow was slow, hesitant. And Ash, feeling that hesitation like a second heartbeat, moved with a grace that came not from martial training, but from understanding. By sunset, Corvus knelt, not in defeat, but in recognition. In the moment when his sword fell and his defenses dropped, he felt what Ash had always known, that the younger king wasn't fighting to dominate, he was fighting to transform. "I accept your surrender," Ash said, his voice steady and kind, "and I'm asking you to stand with me. Not as a defeated general, but as a counselor who understands the old ways and can help us navigate the change." Corvus looked at him for a long moment, then at Kira standing beside the prince, her silver eyes bright with starlight and compassion. "You would trust me?" the old general asked. "After everything I've done?" "Yes," Ash said simply. "Because I can feel your heart, and underneath all the rage and the programming, you're tired. You're tired of a system that makes you choose between cruelty and irrelevance." Corvus stood slowly, his sword clattering to the ground. "Then I accept," he said. "I accept your mercy, Your Majesty, and I accept the future you're building, even though I don't understand it." Behind them, the soldiers who'd come to fight lowered their weapons. Some wept. Others fell to their knees as understanding bloomed in their hearts. The war was ending not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. That night, as ash fell from the still-burning fires on the battlefield, Ash and Kira stood together and looked out at the kingdom below. "We survived," Kira whispered. "We survived," Ash echoed. "But the real work begins now. Peace is harder than war, love. We have to prove that a kingdom built on mercy doesn't crumble." Kira leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then we'll prove it," she said. "One rejected soul at a time. We'll rebuild everything they told us was worthless." Spring came to the capital like a prayer answered. The gardens bloomed in colors that seemed impossible, reds and golds and silvers, as if the earth itself was celebrating. The walls that had stood as monuments to conquest were being reshaped into monuments to healing. Schools were built for children rejected by their families for their gifts. Temples rose where prisons had stood. And in the throne room, a new law was inscribed in stone. Mercy shall be valued as highly as strength. Rejection is not judgment. Compassion is not weakness. Ash and Kira stood together at the height of the palace, overlooking the transformed capital. They were older now, though only months had passed. The weight of building something new, of holding an entire kingdom in the balance between the old world and the new, had carved itself into their faces. But their eyes still held that light, that fierce, defiant love that had survived exile and war and the constant pressure to compromise their vision. "Do you remember," Kira asked, "the night I found you bleeding in the snow?" "I remember every moment since," Ash replied. "Every moment of discovering that rejection wasn't the end. It was a beginning." Kira turned to face him fully. "I have something to tell you," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Something I've only just confirmed." Ash felt it before she spoke. The shift in her heartbeat, the subtle change in her scent, the new presence blooming in the space between them like a second heartbeat. "A child," he whispered. "Our child," Kira confirmed. "A son or daughter born of exile and revolution. Born of two people the kingdom tried to erase. Born of mercy and fire and the radical belief that love can transform everything." Ash pulled her close, and in that moment, something shifted in the kingdom itself. The very foundations seemed to sing. The moon rose higher than it had ever risen, and for one perfect eternal moment, it seemed like all the stars were watching. "What will we teach them?" Ash asked, holding his wife against his chest, feeling their child move in the space between heartbeats. "The truth," Kira said, "that rejection is sometimes destiny in disguise, that the wounds we carry can become our greatest strengths, that love is the only revolution that actually changes the world." Below them, the capital was lit by thousands of torches. People moved through the streets, speaking in quiet voices about hope, about possibility, about the extraordinary belief that a kingdom could transform itself through mercy instead of domination. In the outer provinces, former rebels wore the new insignia, not as defeat, but as choice. In the temples, rejected wolves were teaching young children that their gifts mattered. In the courts, bold alpha families were learning slowly, painfully, that power could be redefined. It wasn't perfect. The work of transformation would take generations. But as Ash and Kira stood together at the edge of night, feeling their child stir in the space between them, they understood something fundamental. The kingdom didn't have to be perfect. It only had to be willing to change. And sometimes, willingness was enough. The moon descended like a benediction, and Ash kissed his wife beneath its silver light. A kiss that tasted like redemption, like revolution made manifest, like the extraordinary moment when two broken people chose to build something beautiful from their shared wounds. In the distance, wolves began to sing, not the old songs of domination and conquest, but new songs. Songs about mercy, songs about love, songs about the night when rejection became destiny and destiny became kingdom. And in every corner of the realm, souls who'd been told they were useless, powerless, unworthy, heard those songs and understood. They were not alone. They had never been alone. They had only been waiting for a prince and an exile to teach them that rejection could be rewritten as redemption. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.